This is Focus on Africa from BBC World News. I'm Sophie Ikenye. Our top stories. Lesotho's First Lady is charged with the murder of the Prime Minister's former wife after handing herself in. Daniel Arap Moi, Kenya's longest-serving president, dies at 95.
He passed away peacefully. I was by his side. And as a family, we've accepted.
Tributes are paid from across the continent where he was lauded as a peacemaker. But at home, his legacy is mixed, tainted by corruption, tribalism, and human rights abuses. Opposition supporters celebrate the annulment of the presidential election result in Malawi. Thanks for joining us on Focus on Africa from BBC World News. In the last hour, dramatic developments from Lesotho. The First Lady has been charged with the murder of the Prime Minister's previous wife, Messiah Tabane, turned herself into police earlier today after being in hiding in South Africa. Police say 8 others have also been charged with murder. Let's bring in the BBC's Mary Harper. Mary, what more do we know about this?
At the moment, there's very few details that have emerged apart from what you've already told us. But there's some reports that the First Lady is going to be in custody this evening. There was talk that she was meant to appear in court earlier today, but that didn't happen. So it's very dramatic. It's like something that you might get from a murder mystery novel, a crime novel, rather than something in reality on the ground in Lesotho.
How did we get here?
It's a most extraordinary story. 2 years ago, the Prime Minister's previous wife, who he was involved in very bitter divorce proceedings with her, she was shot dead outside her home just 2 days before he was inaugurated. And so this obviously threw the country into complete chaos. And then some details emerged earlier this year that led to the Prime Minister himself, Thomas Tabane, being questioned by the police. And then the police also demanded that the current First Lady, she also come in for questioning. She then went missing, she disappeared. It now seems like she was in South Africa, and she then agreed to return to Lesotho and handed herself into the police today, and then literally just not long ago at all, she was charged officially with murder along with 8 others, but we don't know who they are yet.
All right, Mary Harper, thank you for that update. Thank you. And we can now speak to Marfaile Mohlobi, a journalist from the Lesotho Times. Thanks for taking time to talk to us. I wonder what the reaction has been in the country there.
Well, as it is, you can just imagine what everybody is just hype all over the place. Mixed feelings. People are excited that the First Lady has actually handed herself over. And there are some who actually think that this is just a simulation. Probably she could even go scot-free. So it's really a whole lot of reactions coming from different people and different places as we speak.
So what do we expect to happen now?
Oh, well, as she rightly said, she was supposed to have appeared before court for a remand today after she was charged with the murder of Dipolelo Tabane. It was not possible because the director of public prosecutions was not in the country, and she is yet to give a directive of whether to prosecute or not. So once she is back, that means the First Lady can only then appear before the court. So probably tomorrow we are likely to see her doing so. But as for tonight, she will be held at the police headquarters.
What about the husband? Because he had said he would resign. What is the plan here? And also because he's being questioned also.
The husband is very silent, so is his party, as it is. Even now we try to get hold of him. He is not picking. We tried to get hold of his spokesperson. Still, that was in vain. So it is really not known what this could mean. But just about an hour and a half ago, there was a press conference which was called in by the Deputy Commissioner of Police to give the updates of all the the unraveling developments.
All right. Mafaile Mohoboli, the journalist from Lesotho, thank you. Well, let's move on now because Kenya has declared a period of national mourning following the death of the country's longest-serving president, Daniel Arap Moi. He was 95 years old. Flags will fly at half-mast until sunset on the day of his burial on the 12th of February. The Deputy President, William Ruto, has described him as selfless and sincere. But Kenyan opposition figures have criticized him for tribalism, corruption and human rights abuses. We can now speak to our senior Africa correspondent, Anne Soy. She's in Nairobi. Anne, what's the mood like in the country tonight?
Well, Sophie, as you rightly pointed out there, the reaction has been mixed to the news of the death of the former president, Daniel Arap Moi. There are those who still adore him, they respect him, they think they see that he cut the figure of a statesman. But then there are those who remember him in different ways. Assassinations that happened under his watch have been discussed, especially on social media. But you'll also remember that 18-year-olds or people who are in their early 20s do not remember him as a president. He left office in 2002. And when he was leaving office, you remember that there was mud that was thrown at him, and the negative feelings were really strong at that point, especially among opposition supporters. But today we have seen some of the people who had very strong words for him in 2002, thanking him for that peaceful handover of power, and also, just looking back in hindsight and looking at the failings of the governments that succeeded his, and just comparing and thinking that in some ways Moi's government may have been better in not in every way, but in some ways. My colleague Ferdinand Omondi has been looking back at his life.
Daniel Arap Moi rose to power in 1978 upon the death of Kenya's first president, Jomo Kenyatta. This was his first major political victory, having outmaneuvered Kenyatta's inner circle to rise to the top. This shrewdness became the hallmark of his 24-year reign. In his early days, he rallied Kenyans to join him in building the country behind the popular slogan Nyayo, which is Swahili for footsteps. Moi was popular and the country largely progressive. But after the attempt to overthrow him in 1982, Moi transformed into a dictator who viciously clamped down on freedoms. Many were arrested arbitrarily. Tribalism, human rights violations, and extrajudicial killings followed. The word Nyayo changed from a patriotic call to a chilling reminder of torture chambers where many civilians and perceived anti-government politicians alike were persecuted and detained without trial. By 1990, President Moi was a pariah. Amid international sanctions, he faced mounting pressure to introduce multi-party democracy and presidential term limits. But his government responded to protests with baton-wielding police on opposition leaders and supporters. Eventually, he yielded, but with a divided opposition, he won back-to-back elections in 1992 and 1997. But staggering corruption scandals blighted his legacy, the most prominent of which being the billion-dollar Golden Bag scandal involving fictitious exports of gold in which he was directly implicated. He always denied the allegations.
We were suffering during that period because World Bank, IMF did not help. So I couldn't have.
But your own top officials,
I wouldn't have allowed anybody.
But your own top officials are now pointing the finger at you on the witness stand at the Golden
You
Bag.
cannot, it is only a sane person, to allow billions of shillings verbally. Can you?
When his two terms ended in 2002, Moi favored Uhuru Kenyatta as his successor. But Uhuru was largely seen as his stooge, and the son of Kenya's first president lost by a landslide to an opposition coalition led by Mwai Kibaki. Moi then retired, facing the jeers of thousands as he handed over power to Kibaki. Analysts say he still influenced Kenyan politics in the background, as influential government officials and members of parliament sought his counsel even in his retirement. Moi lived to see Uhuru Kenyatta eventually become president in 2013. In death, some Kenyans will remember the name Daniel Toroitich Arap Moi fondly. Others who suffered greatly under his reign would sooner forget the man and his legacy.
And as Ferdinand Omondi says there, President Daniel Moi, the former president's rallying call was Nyayo, its Swahili word for footsteps. And some in his family followed in their father's footsteps. Some of his sons went into politics. The most prominent among them is the youngest, Gideon Moi. He's now a senator. He spoke on behalf of the family.
He passed away peacefully. I was by his side. And as a family, we've accepted. And mine is just to give my heartfelt gratitude to all Kenyans and non-Kenyans for the prayers and thoughts that have been given to Mzee and to our family. Thank you all, and God bless you all. Thank you.
President Uhuru Kenyatta issued a proclamation and said that directed the nation to observe a period of national mourning until the former president is buried. He'll be buried at his home in Kabarak, about 2 hours drive from Nairobi. And during that time, flags are flying at half-mast across the country and in diplomatic missions across the world. Apart from that, he will be accorded a state funeral with full military honors. Sophie.
All right, answer for us there in Nairobi. Thank you. Well, more tributes have been pouring in over Mr. Moi's death. Kenya's current president, Uhuru Kenyatta, said the continent was immensely blessed by the dedication of the late president, who spent almost his entire adult life serving Kenya and Africa. And indeed, on the continent, Uganda's president, Yoweri Museveni, said Mr. Moi supported the East African community and its integration, while Tanzania's President John Magufuli said he would be remembered for promoting regional integration. Now, Kenya's former Prime Minister Raila Odinga, who was detained by the Moi regime for campaigning for multi-party democracy, used his statement to give thanks for his long life of service to the nation. This is Focus on Africa from BBC World News. Still to come, we will hear what life was like for Kenyans under the rule of former President Moi. I'm Sophie Kenya, and you're watching Focus on Africa from BBC World News. Our top stories on this program: the First Lady of Lesotho has been charged with the murder of the Prime Minister's former wife. Kenya has declared an indefinite period of mourning after the death of former President Daniel Arap Moi at the age of 95. Let's now take a quick look at other stories making headlines across Africa and the rest of the world. Kenyan police have begun an investigation into the death of 14 children at a primary school in the western town of Kakamega. Local officials say a crowd of students was rushing down a staircase which then collapsed, but it's unclear what led to the crash. Dozens more were injured. And pictures have emerged of the panic and chaos in the immediate aftermath. Distressed families gathered outside the school as ambulances began taking the dead and injured to hospital. And as news spread, relatives then arrived at Kakamega Hospital, parking the corridors as they waited for updates on the children. Now, this mother was among those desperate for information.
It seems like they were scared off by something, as they were seen running away in groups like bees, falling down from the building to their deaths. The building didn't collapse, they just fell off.
An arrest warrant has been issued for South Africa's former president, Jacob Zuma, after he failed to appear in court to face corruption charges. The judge at the pre-trial hearing questioned whether a sick note which was presented was valid or even written by a doctor. The warrant comes into force if Mr. Zuma does not appear when his trial begins in May. And the U.S. says more than $300 million of money stolen by Nigeria's former military leader, Sani Abacha, is to be returned to the country. And the U.S. Department of Justice says the assets were laundered through American financial institutions during and after General Abacha's rule, which ended with his death in 1998. Well, let's take you back to that top story, the death of former President of Kenya, Daniel Arap Moi, and I'm joined by the head of journalism, Solomon Mugera, a fellow Kenyan, and of course he remembers Mr. Moi's time in office very well. Thanks for taking time to talk to us. You were a journalist during Moi's regime. How was it like then?
It was a difficult time because Kenya at that time was under one-party state, and KBC, or Kenya Broadcasting Corporation, where I worked as a young journalist, was almost nearly a monopoly because liberalization of the airwaves was just beginning. And when I say a monopoly, President Daniel Arap Moi's news monopolize the airwaves. It is to be His Excellency President Daniel Arap Moi has done this, has done that, and you had nearly 15 to 20 minutes of news, depending on how many activities President Moi did on that day. They're gonna all have to be covered. And you had to start by saying His Excellency President Daniel Arap Moi. But two things stick in my mind about his rule that time when I was still with KBC. The first one, when people talk about fake news nowadays, I remember how the state broadcast at that time actually perpetuated fake news. On one occasion, there was violence in the city, Nairobi. And one of my colleagues was asked to go on air to say, Nairobi is peaceful, it's calm. And because people could only tune into the KBC, they heard on radio and they saw on television, Nairobi is calm, it's peaceful, people could go in, only to be met with tear gas and violence. And that to me is a very, very sad way of a broadcaster serving the audience. And then the other one was during President Moi's time in 1992, around March 1992, we had murders of political prisoners who are clamoring for the release of their children, the Koigwa Mweres of this world, Rumba Kinuthia, Mirugi Kariuki, and others. And they were huddled in a small tent together with Wangari Maathai, Professor Wangari Maathai, the late. And they were huddled in there. The fifth day, the police came and ordered them to leave. They didn't, and they tear gassed them. We saw these mothers frothing by the mouth. They came out of the tent and they stripped naked. In the African culture, that's a curse. It's a sight that nobody wants to see, not even a journalist.
Solomon, that's very interesting. Did you ever meet President Moi?
Yes, as a student at Chavakali High School, I was, I think, in Form 2. Chavakali High School was known for music. They sang so well. And one time when we used to travel to these competitions, we traveled in a school bus that was almost like a cage. It was a wire mesh behind where we sat. You looked like animals. So one day we had a delegation going to President Moi's home in Kabarak, and we decided to tell the then Minister for Local Governments, Moses Mudavadi. He was a really bally and well-connected politician. We told him we want to accompany you to go and demand for a school bus. He agreed. We went there and we told the president, look here, we need that bus, and he delivered it after 1 year.
Wow, that's interesting. But let's just bring in Stephen Kalonzo Musyoka. He's Kenya's former vice president and worked very closely with former President Moi. Thanks for taking time to talk to us on Focus on Africa. We've been getting mixed reaction from all over about the death of President Moi. You worked very closely with him in his government. How was he perceived on the world stage?
I beg your pardon, you're not coming out very clearly.
Yes, the question was how
Hello,
was...
can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. How was President Moi perceived on the world stage?
How was he perceived in the world stage?
Yes.
Very well. I had occasion to work with President Moi, foreign minister, between the years 1993 and 97. And I can tell you during that time, he worked very hard for regional peace and integration. And I can tell you that because I'm in view from Juba, the capital of South Sudan, that President Moi worked so closely to ensure that the peace in the greater Sudan, and eventually this event led to the world's newest state, the Republic of Sudan. He was committed, was passionate about it, and also at the level of East Africa, he worked very hard for the East African community and integration process in East Africa. So, but of course he had his challenges because one time the Bretton Woods institutions were hard on him. And I remember as a young foreign minister worked so hard that we had aid restored to Kenya. Eventually, when we worked hard to repeal the contentious Article 2A of the Kenyan Constitution, then that had the effect of making President Moi be seen as a Democrat internationally, and therefore restored the image of the country as an emerging democracy in Africa.
All right, Mr. Musyoka, you spoke to him a lot even after he left power. Is there anything he told you he regretted?
Well, not really. President Moi, first of all, was himself a believer. He's a committed Christian. And he had this thing about his ability to forgive and his humility. So when he was handing over in 2002 to President Mwai Kibaki, I remember that there were some people who jeered him. And he had the ability just to forgive them. And I don't think that he had then what would have been a major regret that he had opened the country to pluralism. I don't think he regretted that at all. But of course, every leader must have his low and high moments, and some of those moments, I'm quite sure, were when he felt misunderstood by the international community because of his firm grip on power. He was a very strong leader. He had a hands-on approach. He was a stickler for time. I mean, if he gave you an appointment, you better be there 10 minutes before. Okay, are we together?
We are together. Yes, Mr. Kalonzo Musyoka, thank you very much for taking time to talk to us. I know you're in Juba at the moment. That's why we had to do a telephone conversation with you. But thank you for taking time to talk to us and, of course, paying tribute. Now, it's a good time to be alive in Malawi, said one opposition supporter today as he celebrated the Constitutional Court's annulment of last year's disputed election. Judges said there had been widespread irregularities in the vote, which saw President Peter Mutharika narrowly re-elected last May. Joining me from Lilongwe is the BBC's Sami Awami. Sami, what's been happening so far?
Well, Sophie, there have been two kinds of moves here, if you like. Earlier today, I went to the headquarters of the national headquarters of Malawi Congress Party, and there the mood was simply celebratory. Supporters from all kinds of walks, they were there, especially young people. They turned out in thousands, and they were there wearing, party uniforms, and they were just celebrating, just celebrating there. And there were all kinds of entertainments. There were music, there were stand-up comedy. There were a lot of things going on there. But then when you went outside, the city, walking around the streets, life was going on just like normal. In markets, everyone was going on just normal with their business. And when I asked around, because many people were curious about negative reaction to the decision that the Constitutional Court made yesterday, and many people said maybe because Lilongwe is known to be a stronghold of opposition. That's why people, were still, supportive of what had happened yesterday. So, yeah, at the national headquarters of the Malawi Congress Party, it was the celebration, and out on the street, life was going on just like normal.
All right, Sami Awami, thank you very much indeed for that update there from Malawi. Now, we leave you with some images from the life of the former president of Kenya, Daniel Arap Moi. Thanks for watching Focus on Africa.